Let me ask you something personal. Not that personal. Calm down. But here's the question. Do you think humans are naturally meant to be with one person? One partner? Forever? Till death do you part? Sharing a blanket and arguing about what to watch for the rest of your natural life? Or do you think that monogamy, the whole one partner deal, is something society constructed, packaged neatly, and handed to us with a bow on top and a very stern look that said, "This is just how it is now"? Because here is the thing. That question, whether humans are naturally monogamous, is one of the most debated questions in all of evolutionary biology. Anthropologists argue about it, evolutionary psychologists argue about it, primatologists argue about it, and if you have ever been in a long-term relationship, you have probably argued about it too in a slightly different context and hopefully not in public. Today we are going back, way back, before marriage certificates, before wedding rings, before society had opinions about your romantic choices. We are going back to the prehistoric world, to the humans who existed before civilization, before agriculture, before any of the institutions we associate with romantic partnership. And we are asking the most honest version of this question possible. Were our ancient ancestors actually monogamous? Did early humans naturally pair off into couples? Or is the entire concept of one partner for life something that came much later, invented by civilizations that needed to organize inheritance, property, and social structure in ways that hunting and gathering never required? The answer is complicated, surprising in places, uncomfortable in others. And by the end of this video, you will understand human relationships in a way that is either deeply reassuring or mildly destabilizing depending on your current life situation. First, we need to establish what monogamy actually means in a biological context, because the word gets used very loosely, and that looseness causes a lot of confusion. In everyday language, monogamy means having one romantic partner, usually long-term, usually exclusive. The assumption baked into the word is fidelity, one person fully committed to one other person, not pursuing additional partners. In biology, the definition is more technical and, importantly, more nuanced. Biologists distinguish between social monogamy and sexual monogamy, and the difference between these two concepts is enormous and changes everything about how we interpret the behavior of any species, including our own. Social monogamy means two individuals pair up, live together, raise offspring together, and present to the world as a bonded pair. They function as a unit. They cooperate. They share resources and parenting responsibilities. Sexual monogamy means those same two individuals are exclusively mating with each other and nobody else. Here is the critical insight from decades of animal behavior research. Social monogamy and sexual monogamy are not the same thing. They do not always occur together, and in the animal kingdom, they very frequently do not. The classic example is birds. Birds were long held up as the gold standard of monogamy in the animal kingdom. Roughly 90% of bird species form socially monogamous pair bonds. They nest together, raise chicks together, defend territory together. For a long time, biologists pointed to birds as evidence that monogamy was a natural and stable reproductive strategy. Then DNA testing became available. Researchers started paternity testing chicks in socially monogamous bird nests. What they found was that in many species, a significant percentage of chicks were not the offspring of the male in the nest. The female had mated with other males while maintaining her social pair bond. The male in the nest was raising chicks that weren't genetically his without apparently being aware of this fact. This phenomenon, social monogamy combined with outside mating, is now documented in hundreds of bird species and is considered one of the most widespread reproductive strategies in the animal kingdom. The pair bond is real. The social partnership is genuine. The sexual exclusivity, however, is a different story entirely. Why does this matter for prehistoric humans? Because it tells us something important about how to interpret the evidence we have for human pair bonding. The question isn't just whether early humans formed pairs. The question is what kind of pairs they formed and what those pairs actually meant in practice. Let's look at where humans sit in the primate family tree, because our closest relatives tell us a great deal about our own evolved tendencies. Humans are most closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos. sharing roughly 98 to 99% of our DNA with both species. Chimpanzees and bonobos are not monogamous in any sense of the word. Chimpanzee society is organized around multi-male, multi-female groups in which mating is largely promiscuous. Females mate with multiple males. Males compete intensely for mating access, and pair bonds in the human sense simply don't exist. Bonobo society is similarly non-monogamous, though bonobos are notably less aggressive than chimpanzees and use sexual behavior as a social bonding mechanism in ways that go well beyond reproduction. Gorillas, our next closest relatives, go in the opposite direction, but not toward monogamy. Gorillas are polygynous, meaning dominant males maintain exclusive reproductive access to groups of females. One male, multiple females. Not monogamy in any definition. Among the great apes, the only species that forms anything resembling pair bonds in the human sense are gibbons. Gibbons are socially monogamous, forming long-term pairs that raise offspring together. But gibbons are not closely related to humans. They branched off the primate family tree much earlier. And even gibbon pair bonds, when subjected to DNA testing, turn out to include outside mating at rates that would raise eyebrows at any wedding reception. So the primate evidence doesn't point cleanly toward natural human monogamy. Our closest relatives range from promiscuous to polygynous. The species most similar to us in social structure don't practice monogamy. This doesn't tell us definitively what early humans did. Evolution is not that straightforward. But it establishes that strict monogamy is not the obvious default for primates in general, or for our branch of the family tree in particular. Now let's look at the physical evidence, because our own bodies contain evolutionary clues about the mating system our ancestors operated in, and those clues are written in anatomy that hasn't changed significantly since before civilization began. The first clue is body size difference between males and females, what biologists call sexual dimorphism. In species where males compete intensely for exclusive access to females, polygynous species, males tend to be significantly larger than females. Bigger males win more fights, secure more mating opportunities, and pass on more genes. Over evolutionary time, this drives male body size up relative to female body size. In gorillas, for example, males are roughly twice the size of females. In chimpanzees, the difference is smaller, but still significant. In species where pair bonding is the norm and male competition is lower, males and females tend to be closer in size. Gibbons, the pair bonding apes, show very little size difference between sexes. Where do humans fall? Somewhere in the middle, but closer to the pair bonding end of the spectrum than to the intense competition end. Human males are on average about 15 to 20% larger than human females. This is more dimorphism than you'd expect in a strictly monogamous species, but significantly less than you'd see in a highly polygynous one. The anatomy suggests a mating system that involved some male competition. Not the intense winner-takes-all competition of gorillas, but not the low competition equality of strictly pair-bonded species either. The second clue is testicle size. This is where it gets genuinely interesting. In species where females mate with multiple males, promiscuous mating systems, males have evolved relatively large testicles. The reason is sperm competition. If a female mates with multiple males in quick succession, the males whose sperm is most numerous and most motile is more likely to fertilize the egg. Natural selection favors males who produce more sperm, which over evolutionary time produces larger testicles relative to body size. In strictly monogamous species, sperm competition is low or absent. If you're the only male mating with a female, you don't need to outcompete anyone else's sperm, and relative testicle size is correspondingly smaller. Human males have testicles that are larger than you'd expect in a strictly monogamous species, but smaller than in highly promiscuous species like chimpanzees. Once again, humans land in the middle. The anatomy suggests a mating system with some degree of multiple mating, not the full promiscuity of chimpanzees, but not strict sexual exclusivity either. The third clue comes from facial hair and secondary sex characteristics. The prominent facial features of human males, the stronger brow ridges, jaw structure, and facial hair that develop at puberty. are consistent with sexual selection, the evolutionary process by which traits that attract mates or intimidate rivals become more pronounced over time. The presence of these traits suggests that male competition and female choice were both factors in human evolutionary history, which is more consistent with a mating system involving competition and choice than with strict monogamy where mate choice is settled early and permanently. None of these physical clues tells us definitively what prehistoric humans did, but they collectively paint a picture of a species whose evolutionary history involved some degree of male competition, some degree of female mate choice, and a mating system that was probably more flexible and complex than strict, lifelong sexual monogamy. Let's talk about what the anthropological evidence from hunter-gatherer societies actually shows, because this is where we get closest to understanding what prehistoric human social life looked like before civilization changed everything. Modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups that have maintained or recently maintained a lifestyle based on hunting and foraging rather than agriculture and settlement, are our best available window into prehistoric social organization. They are not identical to prehistoric humans. They have their own histories, their own cultural developments, their own specificities. But they share the basic economic and social conditions of prehistoric life in ways that agricultural and industrial societies don't, and the patterns that appear consistently across multiple hunter-gatherer groups in different parts of the world tell us something important about what human social organization looks like in its baseline form. What do those patterns show? The overwhelming majority of documented hunter-gatherer societies practice some form of pair bonding. Almost every hunter-gatherer group studied by anthropologists has a concept of partnership or marriage, a recognized social bond between individuals that carries obligations, expectations, and social meaning. In that sense, pair bonding appears to be a human universal or very close to it. But the form those pair bonds take varies enormously. Polygyny, one man with multiple female partners, is documented in a substantial minority of hunter-gatherer societies where ecological conditions support it, meaning where individual men can accumulate enough resources to support multiple partners and their offspring. Polyandry, one woman with multiple male partners, dad or ref, is rarer but documented. Strict lifelong monogamy in the sense of one partner forever with no exceptions is actually relatively uncommon as a rigid cultural norm in hunter-gatherer contexts. Serial monogamy, forming a pair bond, raising children together, potentially forming new pair bonds later in life, appears to be among the most common patterns. The anthropologist Helen Fisher, who has studied human pair bonding extensively, argues that humans evolved what she calls a dual reproductive strategy, a tendency toward pair bonding, forming partnerships for cooperative child-rearing, combined with a tendency toward what she diplomatically terms extra-pair mating. In plain language, humans evolved to form partnerships and to sometimes cheat on those partnerships. Both tendencies are real, both have evolutionary logic behind them, and both appear consistently across human societies in ways that suggest they are features of human nature rather than bugs introduced by particular cultures. This dual strategy makes evolutionary sense when you think about it from first principles. Forming a pair bond gives a child two caregivers, dramatically increasing survival odds in a dangerous prehistoric environment where a single parent trying to feed and protect a dependent infant was at serious disadvantage. But maintaining the possibility of mating outside the pair bond meant access to genetic diversity, potential access to higher quality genes, and insurance against a partner's infertility. Both strategies had survival value. Both were selected for. The result is a species with genuine pair bonding tendencies and genuine tendencies that pull against strict sexual exclusivity simultaneously, which is, when you think about it, a pretty accurate description of the complicated relationship history of most humans you have ever known. Now let's get specific about the prehistoric context, the actual environment in which early human mating patterns evolved, because environment shapes behavior in ways that are easy to overlook when we think abstractly about evolution. Early humans lived in small mobile bands. The evidence from prehistoric sites and from modern hunter-gatherer analogs suggests groups of roughly 20 to 50 individuals for day-to-day living, with larger gatherings of several hundred people occurring periodically when resources allowed. These larger gatherings were almost certainly important for mating. They provided access to potential partners outside the immediate band, reducing inbreeding and increasing genetic diversity. Within the small band, everyone knew everyone. There was no privacy in any modern sense of the word. Every individual's relationships, conflicts, alliances, and behaviors were visible to the entire group. This social transparency had significant implications for mating behavior. Unlike in large anonymous agricultural societies where individuals could maintain separate lives with separate partners, in a band of 30 people, everyone knew what everyone else was doing at essentially all times. This visibility would have had complex and contradictory effects on mating behavior. On one hand, it would have made concealing outside mating more difficult, harder to maintain a secret relationship when you live in a group of 30 people who share a campfire every night. On the other hand, it would have created social pressure and potential for conflict when outside mating was discovered, which would have driven the development of social norms around partnership and fidelity as mechanisms for managing that conflict. Conflict over mating is one of the most destabilizing forces in small group social life. In a band of 30 people, where everyone depends on everyone else for survival, for hunting cooperation, for childcare sharing, for protection against predators and rival groups, internal conflict over sexual access is genuinely dangerous. It can fracture the cooperative relationships that keep everyone alive. This is one of the reasons many anthropologists believe that pair bonding norms, social rules around partnership and fidelity, evolved not just for reproductive reasons, but as social technology for managing conflict in small groups where cooperation was essential for survival. The pair bond in this interpretation was not just about raising children together. It was about maintaining the social peace that made group survival possible. There is another dimension to prehistoric mating that almost never gets discussed in popular treatments of this subject, and it changes the picture significantly. Cooperative breeding. Humans are what anthropologists call cooperative breeders, a species in which individuals other than the biological parents regularly contribute to raising offspring. This is actually unusual among primates. Chimpanzees and gorillas don't do this in any systematic way. But in human societies across the world and throughout recorded history, child rearing has been a community activity, not just a parental one. Grandmothers in particular appear to have played an enormous role in early human-child survival. The grandmother hypothesis, first proposed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes in the 1990s, argues that the unusual human pattern of women surviving well past reproductive age evolved specifically because postmenopausal women provided such significant survival advantages to their grandchildren that genes promoting longevity in females were strongly selected for. Grandmothers who helped feed and care for grandchildren increased those grandchildren's survival rates enough to pass on genes for grandmotherly longevity. What does this have to do with monogamy? Everything. Because if child rearing in prehistoric humans was a community activity, if mothers, grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, and other band members all contributed meaningfully to keeping infants alive, then the argument for strict pair bonding as the only viable child-rearing arrangement weakens considerably. In a species where the entire band shares childcare responsibilities, where infants have multiple caregivers beyond their biological parents, the evolutionary pressure toward strict monogamy as the only reproductive strategy that produces surviving offspring is lower than in a species where infants depend entirely on their two biological parents. Alternative arrangements. A mother with multiple male partners all contributing resources, a male with multiple female partners in a resource-rich environment, a loosely bonded community sharing parenting broadly, become viable in ways they wouldn't be in a species without cooperative breeding. This doesn't mean prehistoric humans were universally non-monogamous. It means the picture was more flexible, more context-dependent, and more varied than any single label. Monogamous, polygamous, promiscuous can capture. Here is the honest summary of everything the evidence points toward. Early humans almost certainly formed pair bonds, the tendency to partner up, to form recognized social relationships with specific individuals that involved cooperation, resource sharing, and joint child rearing appears to be genuinely ancient and genuinely human. It shows up consistently across hunter-gatherer societies. It is consistent with our physical anatomy. It makes evolutionary sense given the demands of raising slow-developing, highly dependent human infants in a dangerous prehistoric world. But those pair bonds were almost certainly not characterized by strict lifelong sexual exclusivity as a universal norm. The physical evidence, body size dimorphism, relative testicle size, suggests a mating system with some degree of competition and outside mating. The anthropological evidence from hunter-gatherer societies shows enormous variation in the specific form pair bonds take. The cooperative breeding patterns of early humans reduced the evolutionary pressure towards strict monogamy as the only viable reproductive arrangement. The most accurate description of the prehistoric human mating system is probably this: a flexible tendency toward pair bonding, combined with a flexible tendency toward outside mating, varying significantly based on ecological conditions, resource availability, individual circumstances, and the social norms of specific groups. Serial monogamy, forming genuine partnerships that could last years or decades, potentially followed by new partnerships, may have been among the most common patterns. And the band-level social pressure to maintain cooperative relationships probably created norms around partnership fidelity as a mechanism for social stability rather than purely as a biological imperative. What prehistoric humans almost certainly did not have is the rigid, legally enforced, religiously sanctioned, lifelong exclusive monogamy that became the norm in many agricultural civilizations. That version of monogamy, one partner forever, with significant social consequences for deviation, appears to be at least partly a product of settled civilization, property inheritance, and the particular social organization that agriculture created. Which means the next time someone tells you that strict lifelong monogamy is simply natural human behavior hardwired into our biology, you now have roughly 100,000 years of evolutionary evidence to complicate that claim. The real takeaway from all of this isn't that prehistoric humans were irresponsible, or that monogamy is fake, or that your relationship choices are somehow more or less valid based on what a prehistoric human did 50,000 years ago. That would be a significant misreading of what evolutionary evidence actually tells us. The real takeaway is that humans are flexible, extraordinarily, unusually, remarkably flexible in our social and reproductive behavior compared to most species. We form deep, genuine, long-lasting partnerships. We also have tendencies that pull against strict exclusivity. Both of those things are real, and both appear throughout human history in every culture ever studied. What that flexibility means is that human relationships are shaped not just by biology, but by the social environments, cultural norms, economic conditions, and individual choices that exist within those environments. Prehistoric humans didn't have a single universal mating system handed down from evolution like a set of instructions. They had tendencies toward bonding, toward competition, toward cooperation, toward flexibility, and they built their social lives around those tendencies in ways that varied by group, by environment, by circumstance. We are still doing exactly the same thing, just with more paperwork.